Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In the glittering lobby of a luxury jewelry store in New York, Jessica Thompson, an elegant black woman in her 30s, was browsing the shop windows intently. She had saved for months to buy a unique engagement ring for her fiancé. Each piece of jewelry sparkled in the light, but her gaze was fixed on a rare piece she had spotted online. At the other end of the store, Brandon Miller, the white manager of the store, eyed her suspiciously. As soon as she delicately touched a ring, he abruptly stepped forward. "Excuse me, miss, but you can't," he began condescendingly. Before she could reply, he implied that she probably couldn't afford it and ordered a salesman to keep a close eye on her. Jessica calmly tried to show her bank ID and a receipt from her previous online purchase, but Brandon, blinded by his prejudices, interrupted her. "We don't accept that kind of behavior here." Humiliated in front of the other customers, Jessica felt her dignity crumble. But what Brandon didn't know was that Jessica wasn't just a client, she was heiress to an international jewelry chain and came to personally inspect the store. An hour later, after she had left the store with her calm and poise, Brandon received a call that changed everything. The number displayed on the screen, Jessica's family business headquarters. The message was clear and straightforward. Brandon had just humiliated the woman who actually owned half the company's value. A wave of panic washed over him. His arrogance had just encountered a truth he had never considered. He had just stepped into a trap of his own ignorance. New York, 5:30 p.m. The streets were teeming with people and taxis honking their horns at high speed. In the tumult, Jessica Thompson, a 32-year-old black woman, walked confidently towards Luster and Diamond, the most renowned jewelry store in the financial district. Her neatly tied hair, elegant dress, and patent leather shoes betrayed her natural class. She wasn't there to lounge around, she was looking for a unique engagement ring for Marcus, her fiancé. As soon as he entered the store, the air changed. Mirrors and chandeliers reflected the light on the jewelry, but also on the cold gaze of the manager, Brandon Miller, a white man in his 40s, known for his arrogance and taste for control. Brandon narrowed his eyes as he saw Jessica approach the windows. "Can I help you, madam?" he asked in a seemingly polite but sharp tone. Jessica replied with a smile, "Yes, I'm looking for a very special, custom-made ring." Brandon raised an eyebrow and exchanged a look with one of the salesmen. "All right," he said slowly. "But I need to make sure you're authorized to handle our collectibles." Jessica, a little surprised but remaining calm, took out her bank card and a receipt from a previous purchase. "Of course. I've already made several transactions here." But Brandon shook his head dismissively. I'm sorry, miss. We can't, you." He trailed off, clearly embarrassed. "Follow me, I'll have to monitor your movements." The customers in the store turned their heads. Jessica felt the heat of humiliation rise within her. Her cheeks flushed slightly, but she showed no anger. She followed Brandon, keeping her head high, as he quietly announced to his salesman, "Make sure she doesn't touch anything without permission." Jessica had been humiliated because of her skin color. But what she knew, and what Brandon didn't, was that it was only the beginning. Brandon Miller watched Jessica condescendingly as she browsed the windows. In his head, he repeated to himself, "Who does she think she is to come here dressed like that?" He was unaware that every gesture, every piece she touched, reflected her experience and knowledge of luxury jewelry. Jessica, on the other hand, remained calm. She was used to dealing with situations where her appearance and skin color made others doubt her worth. She knew that Brandon's humiliation was only a temporary obstacle. "I'm interested in this ring," she said, pointing to a white gold piece set with rare diamonds. Brandon approached, his smile forced, but his eyes held a hint of arrogance. "I'm not sure you can afford that model, ma'am. It's very exclusive." Jessica took a deep breath, then replied gently but firmly, "I'm willing to pay the price, Mr. Miller." The manager, irritated by her calmness, raised his voice slightly so that the salesman could hear him, "Make sure this lady doesn't do anything she shouldn't." Jessica felt the tension in the air. The other customers watched, some surprised, others uncomfortable with the scene. Brandon relished his apparent power, completely oblivious to the irony of the situation. As he turned away to call a colleague and check his procedures, Jessica smiled slightly. She knew something he didn't. In less than an hour, Brandon's role would change. She continued to examine the jewelry, touching each piece with precision and respect, showing that she was no mere customer. Every movement, every gesture, testified to her education and mastery of business. Brandon, blinded by his prejudice, saw only a pretentious and ignorant black woman. But Jessica had already plotted her silent revenge. The humiliation she was currently suffering was nothing compared to the truth she would soon reveal. The tension in the store was reaching its peak. Brandon Miller, convinced of his power, was keeping a close eye on Jessica, her every move scrutinized as if it were a threat. "Excuse me, madam," he said coldly as he stepped forward, "but you cannot touch this room without special permission." Jessica looked up calmly, and with a polite but icy smile, replied, "I respect your rules, Mr. Miller, but I'd just like to examine the ring closely." Brandon, feeling his authority challenged, raised his voice, "I forbid you." The customers' murmurs began to turn into murmurs of discomfort. Some cast embarrassed glances, others seemed amused by the manager's arrogance. Jessica felt a mixture of humiliation and determination. Every word from Brandon, every condescending gesture, fueled her resolve. She knew she had to remain calm. Not a gesture of anger, not a word of impatience. Her elegant appearance and controlled demeanor contrasted sharply with Brandon's growing nervousness. A customer dared to whisper, "He's really rude." Brandon turned around abruptly. "Quiet," he shouted, trying to regain control of the situation. Jessica, however, remained unperturbed. She felt the heat of humiliation, but didn't let it show. On the contrary, her calm and dignity began to attract the attention of the other customers, some of whom looked at her with admiration and empathy. What Brandon didn't know was that he had just created the exact moment when his own position would be reversed. Jessica was no ordinary client, she had the power, influence, and knowledge to turn this humiliation into revenge. And that moment was approaching. After the incident at the jewelry store, Jessica walked out calmly, showing no sign of anger. The busy New York street was engulfing her, but in her mind, everything was perfectly clear: Brandon would pay for his arrogance and prejudice. She paused for a moment in front of a nearby cafe and took out her phone. With a quick gesture, she dialed a number known only to those who knew what real power was. "Hello, this is Jessica Thompson. I want to speak to headquarters immediately," she said firmly. "Yes, Luster and Diamond headquarters. There's a serious problem with your Fifth Avenue store." Meanwhile, Brandon, still in the store, was bragging to his salesman, "See? I showed him who's boss around here." He had no idea that a call would soon turn his day upside down. Jessica, meanwhile, was focused on the details. She had already prepared the financial documents proving her role in the family business. She knew Brandon had no idea who she really was. He thought he had the situation under control, but in reality, he had just walked into the perfect trap. In less than an hour, Brandon would receive a call that would call everything into question: his prejudices, his arrogance, and above all, his sense of superiority. Jessica's revenge would not be brutal or aggressive. It would be relentless and elegant, exactly like her. As she walked away, her quiet smile betrayed her confidence. Brandon had just crossed the line he should never have crossed, and very soon, he would understand the magnitude of his mistake. Less than an hour after the incident, Brandon Miller sat at his desk, still looking triumphant. He thought he'd handled the situation with Jessica perfectly. He was poring over a file when his phone rang. The screen read, "Headquarters, Luster and Diamond." Brandon answered confidently, "Yes, Brandon Miller, manager of the Fifth Avenue store." A firm, cold voice rang out from the other end, "Mr. Miller, I'm Jessica Thompson." Brandon raised an eyebrow. "Jessica Thompson? The client?" The voice continued, without a trace of anger, but with undeniable authority, "Yes, exactly. I believe there has been a misunderstanding in your shop. It seems you have misjudged my intentions and my legitimacy as a customer. Brandon felt a shiver run through him. Well, I just wanted to make sure. Jessica interrupted. Make sure I don't touch your jewelry. She paused, each word precise and sharp. Mr. Miller, you have no idea who I am. I'm an heiress and co-owner of Luster and Diamond. And I just noticed that you humiliated me in front of your customers and staff because of my skin color. Silence fell over Brandon. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to find the words. You're. He stammered. Jessica continued calmly, yes. And I wanted you to know that your actions will have consequences. I will report this incident to headquarters, and you will be held accountable for your racist and condescending behavior. Brandon realized the magnitude of his mistake. The arrogance that had fueled him just a few hours earlier was gone. He realized he had just put himself in a position where his career, his reputation, and even his future within the company were in jeopardy. Jessica then hung up, her composure intact. Brandon stood frozen, unable to speak, aware that he had just experienced a humiliation far deeper than the one he had inflicted. Brandon Miller, still reeling from the call, nervously bustled around his office. He frantically typed messages to his colleagues, trying to find a way to fix the situation. Each attempt seemed more hopeless than the last. Maybe a gift or a special discount. He muttered to himself. No. She'll never want that. He didn't realize that Jessica had already anticipated all his strategies. She knew exactly how to control the outcome of this situation and, more importantly, how to turn his arrogance into a public lesson. Meanwhile, Jessica returned home, walking with the same elegance that had marked the jewelry store lobby. From her apartment, she took out a carefully prepared file, photos, videos of the store, customer testimonials, and, above all, proof of her status in the family business. Everything was ready for the final confrontation. Brandon, unaware of this, tried to contact Jessica directly via email and phone. He was practically begging for a meeting. Jessica, I want to apologize. I'm willing to do whatever you want. Jessica smiled as she read his messages. Brandon's panic and despair were exactly what she'd expected. But instead of responding, she scheduled a public gathering at the store, inviting select customers and employees. She knew it would be a memorable scene, and that Brandon would have no way out. In her mind, she rehearsed every word she would say, every gesture she would make. This wasn't brutal revenge, it was a demonstration of power, dignity, and justice, perfectly orchestrated. Brandon, meanwhile, continued to struggle with his own arrogance, unaware that the moment of his ultimate humiliation was fast approaching. The next day, the Luster and Diamond boutique was slightly busier than usual. Jessica Thompson entered confidently, dressed in an elegant suit that commanded respect and admiration. Brandon Miller, still nervous, stood behind the counter, trying to appear in control, but his expression betrayed panic. Jessica walked calmly toward him, each step measured and determined. The customers in the store sensed that something important was about to happen. Hello everyone, Jessica began, her voice calm but resonant. I'm Jessica Thompson, co-owner of Luster and Diamond. I think there was a misunderstanding here yesterday. Brandon flinched, unable to answer. He had always believed his position as director gave him absolute authority. He had no idea that he was now standing before the most powerful person in the company. Jessica continued, looking Brandon straight in the eye. Yesterday, you humiliated me by treating me with suspicion and condescension, simply because of the color of my skin. A few customers murmured, shocked by Jessica's audacity and dignity. Your actions are unacceptable, she continued. And I want everyone to know that discrimination has no place here. Brandon felt sweat trickle down the back of his neck. He tried to stammer out an excuse, I. But Jessica interrupted him with a faint, icy smile. There's nothing to say, Mr. Miller. The evidence speaks for itself. At that moment, an employee played the videos and images taken the day before, showing Brandon's arrogance and condescending behavior. The customers could clearly see the humiliation he had inflicted. Brandon, flushed with shame, finally understood the magnitude of his situation. Jessica, always calm and dignified, had transformed her personal humiliation into public lesson, proving that respect and dignity can never be bought or ignored. The day after the public confrontation, Brandon Miller was summoned to the headquarters of Chandelier, and Diamond Management had reviewed the evidence Jessica provided, videos, testimonies, and her official status within the company. Brandon's situation was clear: he had humiliated a co-owner and violated all the rules of respect and discrimination. Jessica, meanwhile, had already become a talking point among employees and customers alike. Her calm, dignified manner and clever strategy had impressed everyone. She had transformed a humiliating situation into a display of power and respect, without ever raising her voice or losing her temper. At headquarters, Brandon tried to defend himself. I didn't know. But the board of directors was unanimous in its response. Mr. Miller, your behavior is unacceptable. You are suspended immediately, and we will initiate mandatory diversity and respect training for all staff. Brandon felt his world crumble. The man who, just hours earlier, had thought he had the situation under control had lost all credibility. His arrogance had been punished in exemplary fashion, and there was no escape. Jessica, for her part, continued to run her business with elegance. Her public image had strengthened, and the boutique became a symbol of justice, respect, and equality. She had proven that dignity and perseverance could transform a humiliating moment into a resounding victory. Even among customers and staff, his name was now synonymous with respect and quiet power. Brandon, for his part, could never forget the lesson he had learned, and his reputation had suffered irreparably. Weeks after the incident, Brandon Miller's reputation continued to decline. Customers who had witnessed the public confrontation were telling others about the story, and on social media, news of his racist behavior and Jessica's lecture spread quickly. At the office, Brandon desperately tried to repair his reputation. He sent apology emails, offered discounts, and tried to connect with customers, but every move felt fake and awkward. The arrogance he'd displayed in the store had left a lasting impression, and people couldn't forget the way he'd humiliated Jessica. Jessica, for her part, viewed all this with implacable calm. She continued to run the store with professionalism and elegance, earning the loyalty of the staff and the admiration of the customers. The employees, inspired by her dignity and strategy, were now more confident and committed. One day, Brandon tried a personal approach to explain the situation to Jessica, thinking that a private meeting might repair his image. She greeted him with a polite but icy smile. "Mr. Miller," she said softly, "I believe everything has been said and understood. The lesson is clear: respect is not begged for, it is earned." Brandon bowed his head, unable to respond. He understood that his apology, however sincere, could never erase the humiliation he had caused or reverse Jessica's power and reputation. Brandon's fall symbolized not only the end of his arrogance, but also Jessica's resounding victory, transforming injustice into a display of power and dignity. A few days after the incident, Jessica Thompson was invited to participate in an interview for a luxury magazine and influential social media platforms. She spoke about her experience with Brandon Miller, but without anger or resentment. Her message was clear: dignity, respect, and justice never depend on skin color or social status. "What matters," she said calmly and authoritatively, "is how we treat others, even when they seem insignificant to us. Arrogance and prejudice always come back to haunt us." The media coverage was massive. Customers, employees, and even competitors admired her strength, her mastery, and her strategy. Jessica had become not only an authority figure in her company, but also a symbol of dignity and justice. As for Brandon Miller, he finally understood that his reputation was irreparably tarnished. He had tried to redeem himself, but every gesture fell flat in the face of Jessica's silent grandeur. The man who had believed he possessed power and authority had been publicly humiliated, and nothing could reverse that reality. Jessica, on the other hand, continued her life with elegance and success. She had transformed a moment of humiliation into a resounding victory, proving that dignity, patience, and strategic intelligence were more powerful weapons than any form of arrogance. And throughout the city, Her name now resonated as that of a woman who had been able to impose respect and justice, while remaining master of her own power.